Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, The Inside Scoop, Catholics and COP21. My name is Maggie McCarty, and I will be the moderator for this seminar today. And on behalf of all of the staff of Catholic Climate Covenant, we welcome you to today's webinar. This webinar is actually the first in a series of webinars we'll be offering on behalf of the Covenant. Our next webinar will be scheduled on December 14th, and we'll be talking to people who are directly affected by climate change. And of course, as always, we'll be sending you that information directly to your inboxes on your email. Now, today, the agenda for this webinar includes introductions, of course, of myself, and I will be introducing the speaker in just a moment. We'll be talking about the Catholic perspective on climate change. We'll be talking about COP21, what it is and why it matters, and also what the U.S. bishops say about COP21 and what you can do yourselves to be more further involved in this international issue. And then we'll end the session with some questions and answers, and I will give you detailed instructions on how to make that happen when the time comes. But at this point, I would like to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Stephen Colecchi is the director of the Office of International Justice and Peace of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He works on various international issues and coordinates the office's work with Catholic Relief Service, the Church, and other international bodies. He has previously served as the assistant to the Bishop and Diocesan Director of Catholic Charities, Catholic Relief Services, and the Campaign for Human Development in the Catholic Diocese of Richmond. He has directed or chaired numerous charitable arms of the Catholic Church. He's received awards for his work in social justice and is the author of many articles on faith, social justice, and political responsibility. Dr. Colecchi holds a Doctorate of Ministry degree from St. Mary's Seminary and University, a Master's in Religion from Yale University, and a BA from the College of the Holy Cross. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Stephen Colecchi.
Great. Well, Maggie, thank you for that very kind introduction, which was really more than we needed. My kids always laugh when people call me Dr. Colecchi because the only doctor in our house is my wife, who's a clinical psychologist. But my job is to deal with justice and peace issues for the Catholic bishops in the United States. So I'm really happy to offer this webinar on behalf of the Catholic Climate Covenant, who's a key partner with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and many other Catholic national organizations on the issue of climate change. I wanted to start just with some reflections that come out of Laudato Si, praised be in the Latin, praised be, which are reflections of Pope Francis on our common home. And one of the foundational values that is present in that encyclical letter that was written this summer is that God's creation is meant for everyone. It is, in fact, our common home. And in an unprecedented way, the Holy Father addressed this teaching letter, this encyclical, to every person living on the planet. That's a rather wide audience. And he aimed to enter into dialogue with all people about our common home. So the first thing is the encyclical is all about dialogue. He urgently appealed for a new dialogue about how we could shape the future of our planet. He said we need a conversation that includes everyone. And of course, when you hear includes everyone, there's a special concern that we include those at the margins of our communities and at the margins of our world, those whose voices are often lost in these debates. But he says we need a conversation with everyone since the environmental challenge that we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect everyone. Now, the Holy Father is really clear that he's addressing this issue as a moral leader, not as a scientist, not as a politician, but he also is encouraging honest and open debate so that particular interests or particular ideologies don't prejudice the common good of the planet. He also has an amazing way of talking about how the encyclical is really a call to face reality, things that are real. He says, anthropogenic climate change is real. It's not a figment of someone's imagination. In fact, it's really interesting. It's only really in the United States that there is significant population of people who believe that climate change is not real. That you don't find that in other societies around the world. And when I travel, they're kind of mystified at that because we're seeing the effects of climate change already. The Holy Father, of course, cites the very solid scientific consensus that indicates we're presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system. And we're already seeing the effects. We're seeing extreme weather events. We're seeing rises in sea levels. We're seeing damages to crop yields. We're seeing conflict arising in places. You know, a lot of people, when you think of South Sudan, you don't think of climate as a major driver of that conflict. But in Sudan, in South Sudan, in fact, that was a major driver of the conflict, that as climate shifted, and herders had to go further and further south into agricultural lands to find grazing land for their cattle. That brought herders in conflict with farmers, and it was a big factor actually in the violence that erupted in Sudan and South Sudan, and continues to put real stresses on those communities there. And he says that, you know, the Holy Father says, you know, humanity is called to recognize the need for changes of lifestyle, production, and consumption in order to combat this warming, or at least the human causes which produce or aggravate it. And of course, it won't be any surprise for anybody who's been following Pope Francis at all that climate change is also about the poor in a particular way. He makes it very clear in numerous references throughout his encyclical letter that climate change affects the poor the most, and they have the least capacity to adapt to it. They have the fewest resources and reserves to draw upon. And also, they have the fewest resources to make the investments necessary in order to adopt cleaner energy strategies. You know, the poorest areas and countries are less capable of adopting new models for reducing environmental impacts because they lack the wherewithal to develop the necessary processes and to cover their costs. So he's really calling for a major investment by richer nations in poorer nations in this regard. And one of the hopeful things that I've seen in some of my travels around the world at Catholic Relief Services, which is the Relief and Development Agency of the Catholic Church in the United States, is how in even some of the poorest countries, they're adopting new and innovative methods to mitigate and adapt to climate change. They're using solar power in remote villages. They're adopting more resilient crops. They're managing their water much in more advanced ways and doing terracing and so forth, making simple investments, but which have a big payoff in protecting the poorest, most vulnerable communities. We saw that in our own nation with in Louisiana with the terrible hurricanes there. That often poorer communities are located in lower lying areas. In countries like Bangladesh and island nations in the Pacific in particular are very, very worried about the rising sea levels and the intensification of storms. And the church has a really important role to play in all of this. You know, our faith calls us to protect people, calls us to protect the planet, and it sees the two as related, particularly when it comes to poor or vulnerable people. And what's wonderful about Pope Francis is that he challenges both the left and the right. To those on the left, he says, it's many richer countries, in order to deal with climate change, want to make it all about population control. And he says, and I quote, "To blame population growth instead of extreme and selective consumerism on the part of some is one way of refusing to face the issues." That in fact, the historic buildup of greenhouse gases has been due to overconsumption in wealthy nations and not basic consumption in very poor nations. And then he also challenges those on the left, though. You know, he says that we need to, I love this phrase, reject a magical conception of the market. That somehow the market and the drive for profit will somehow, even out all of these needs and take care of our planet. And he says, is it realistic? He asks a very poignant question, a very difficult question. He says, is it realistic to hope that those obsessed with maximizing profits will stop to reflect on the environmental damage which they leave behind for future generations? Of course, that we all know the answer to that rhetorical question. In Laudato Si, he says we have to, many things have to change course. And of course, in this presentation, we'll be talking about what needs to change course at the international level. We'll be talking about the COP21 in a little while. But before I go there, I wanted to talk a little bit about what needs to change in all of us. The Pope says that many things have to change course, but it is we human beings above all who need to change. And he really takes on the kind of consumer mentality. He says the emptier a person's heart is, the more he or she needs things to buy, to own, to consume. And it becomes almost impossible to accept the limits imposed by reality, the limits of the resources of this planet. But what's really interesting is he's not simply calling us to a less full life. In fact, he says, we can live life more fully by living it more simply. We can root it in our relationships with each other and in a simple lifestyle that, when lived consciously, can be liberating. And this is a direct quote: "It is not a lesser life or one lived with less intensity. On the contrary, it is a way of living life to the full." Perhaps you experienced some of this over the Thanksgiving holiday we just celebrated together. What was the heart of that celebration? It was being with each other, wasn't it? It was being with family. It was having time with each other. That's what really, we don't need to consume. We don't need to be running out to the store. We don't need to fill up our lives with things, because our lives are full of relationships with God, with neighbor, with friends and family. Of course, though, in Laudato Si, it's not simply a change to personal lifestyle that's called for, as important as that is, and as much as that calls to all of us. There's need for international action. Reducing greenhouse gases is going to require honesty, courage, and responsibility, above all on the part of those countries which are more powerful and pollute the most. The church here talks about a differential kind of responsibility, where richer, more developed nations are going to be called to make greater sacrifices and greater investments in order to get the greenhouse gases under control. But poor countries too are bound to develop less polluting forms of energy production. And to do so, they're going to require the help of countries that have experienced great growth at the cost of the ongoing pollution of the planet. So they're not off the hook either, but they need help in making this adjustment. We might think of it this way. When I travel around the world, one of the things I notice is that in many developing countries, they have good phone service, but it's almost all cellular. And they have leapfrogged over the need to hardwire a whole country in order to provide telephone service. In the same way, with new technologies, with new creativity, with investments from wealthier nations, and with ingenuity, couldn't we help poorer countries to leapfrog over the carbon-intensive development that we underwent, and to develop in new and more sustainable ways? And this is what COP21 is about, and it really matters. This is the 21st annual meeting of the Conference of Parties. The Conference of Parties are those nations of the world which came together at Kyoto and agreed to meet every year to deal with climate change. This is the 21st meeting, and in these 21 years, there's been minor progress, but not the major progress that is necessary. So in Paris, right now, they're meeting now, there is hope that there will be a breakthrough. The church is praying for a breakthrough. The church is also working for a breakthrough. This is very, very important, not only to the Holy Father, but to the whole Catholic Church. And it matters because it's a global problem. No one nation can solve this problem. It's going to take all of the nations of the world working together to reduce the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, which has already contributed to the warming of the climate in ways that have led to devastation in many places: intensification of storms, more frequent droughts, floods, agricultural damage, agricultural leaves, and glaciers melting at alarming rates. I just recently saw a study on Greenland that shows that the ice shelf there is melting at an alarming rate, which of course contributes to sea level rise, which then makes these more intense storms even more dangerous to coastal areas. So what do we hope for it? What does the church hope for at COP21, at this 21st meeting, which has a lot of national leaders actually already there? I was particularly proud that the leader of our nation, President Obama, and the leader of China spoke together about some commitments they're willing to make at the beginning of the COP21 meetings. We are the two largest economies in the world now, and leadership from major nations might actually help lead to the kind of breakthrough we need. We need some really, in the words of Pope Francis, we need some true statecraft in Paris that upholds really high principles and thinks of the long-term common good. So often politics is driven by the short-term concerns, but we have to, as the Pope says in his encyclical, reject the mindset of short-term gain that presently dominates economics and political considerations, and look for the long-term common good. And this is going to take a lot of courage on the part of political leaders. Our own bishops' conference joined other bishops' conferences throughout the world back in October, at the end of October, and signed an open letter to the COP21 negotiators. And in that open letter, they urged them to craft a fair, legally binding, and truly transformational climate agreement. Actually, we had that was signed on behalf of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops by the president of the conference, Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of Louisville, and we actually sent one of our archbishops over to Rome to be at the release of this statement, standing shoulder to shoulder with bishops from Asia, the Federation of Asian Bishops Conferences, the African Bishops Conference, the Latin American Bishops Conferences, and so forth, and the European Bishops Conferences in Canada and the United States, all together signing this open letter. It was rather unprecedented, really. It was Archbishop Thomas Wensky of Miami who represented the U.S. bishops at the actual signing and release of the statement. And he's the chairman of our Committee on Domestic Justice and Human Development, who, together with Bishop Oscar Cantu, the chairman of our International Justice and Peace Committee, have had real responsibility for raising up the bishop's voice on climate change and other environmental issues. In fact, the Conference of Bishops has held two major national press conferences to highlight the issue here in the United States. On the day that Laudato Si was released, our Cardinal Wuerl, the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., together with our Archbishop Kurtz, did a joint press conference here in Washington in solidarity with the Holy Father, sharing the teaching of Laudato Si, which of course is about the broad range of environmental challenges we face, and also the human challenges that we face. It's promoting an integral ecology where we protect both the planet and people, particularly the poor. But of course, within that is also climate change. And then just before the Holy Father visited in September, Archbishop Wensky and Bishop Cantu were joined by Dr. Carolyn Wu, the president and CEO of Catholic Relief Services. So the Bishops' Conference, together with our agency, worked together to do another press conference right before the Holy Father's visit to remind our nation about what the bishops and the Holy Father are concerned about regarding climate change. So what are we doing? Well, Uh, Cardinal Turkson, this is really interesting. He's the president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. He wrote to bishops throughout the world and asked just last month and asked them to offer support in prayer, in word, and in action for the success of the COP21. And it's really interesting. Pope Francis, never losing an opportunity for a highly symbolic act. As you might know, because of the recent attacks in Paris, they canceled the major march that was to take place in Paris. But instead, people brought shoes and put shoes everywhere to represent the walkers in the march. And Pope Francis sent a pair of his shoes to be present there. So we're all in this together. We're all walking this journey together. And the Conference of Bishops, USCCB, that's U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, is inviting people to pray about the issue, to study about the issue, and to take action. And you can find some things on our website at usccb.org/environment. Now, specifically in the area of advocacy, the U.S. needs to do its part to help COP21 be successful. And there are 3 actions that we've been supporting as a conference of the bishops have been supporting as a conference for some time. One is they're supporting the Nonprofit Energy Efficiency Act, S600, which was introduced in a bipartisan way by Senator Klobuchar and Senator Hoeven, a Democrat and a Republican, that would provide grants of up to $200,000 in matching funds. So the nonprofit agency would have to raise matching funds in order to green up buildings like parishes and schools and hospitals and social service agencies and so forth. Because, the for-profit sector has tax credits and things that help them to green up. This would be a way of helping nonprofits to green up as well, and the church can be kind of a model in that. So we're working on that. Then secondly, we're supporting a national carbon standard to limit carbon pollution. And as you may be aware, the EPA has proposed a national standard, which would then be implemented in each of the 50 states to meet certain targets on carbon emissions. We think the bishops think having a national carbon standard is a good thing. It gives us something to put on the table at the COP21, showing that the U.S. is serious about limiting carbon pollution. It's serious about reducing its emissions. It also happens to be the case that the power plants where these regulations are going to enforce cleaner power plants with fewer emissions actually will help improve the health of low-income children and elderly in particular, because they're often located in, these plants are often located in low-income neighborhoods. And so it'll be a health issue for the church as well as a down payment on commitment to COP21 and reducing the carbon footprint of the United States. And the third thing that we've been very actively supporting together with Catholic Relief Services, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, has been asking Congress to fully fund the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is an international fund that has been set up where richer nations can contribute to the fund, and then that fund can be used by poorer nations to invest in green technologies, to help them adapt to harsher storms, to help them mitigate and adapt to climate change. Half the fund would go to mitigation, and half the fund would go to adaptation to climate change. And that's a really important thing, and we're working very, very, very hard on that because there's always this perception that the United States is so generous in its foreign aid, and in fact, if you ask the average American, how much of the federal budget is devoted to foreign assistance to poor countries, most people would say, it's 20%, 25%. And they say, well, what should it be? And people will say, well, it should be 10%. And then when you tell them it's half of 1%, they're just incredulous because it doesn't match their view of the generosity of the American people. So anyway, the Green Climate Fund, really, really important aspect of foreign aid that could help poor countries adapt and mitigate. So you can read about Catholic teaching on the environment and some of our actions, going to our environment page. You could also add your name to the thousands of others that are sending letters to Todd Stern, who is our lead U.S. climate negotiator over there. It's not too late to do that. You can still do that, and the Catholic Climate Covenant will be getting those messages over there, supporting a strong negotiating position of the United States in the Paris talks. But what I wanted to close with really is a word of hope. Most people, when they look at an issue as big as climate change, they think, what can I do? It's so big, it's so hopeless. We're already experiencing some of the devastating effects. Humanity will never get its act together. And one of the things about Pope Francis is he's about hope. And his encyclical, Laudato Si, is about hope. He assures us that things can change. The Creator does not abandon us. He never forsakes his loving plan or repents of having created us. Humanity still has the ability to work together in building our common home. Faith is not only our belief in God. Faith is also God's belief in us. God believes in us. That's why God gave us a free will. God believes that we can take care of our common home. And as a person of hope, I believe that's absolutely possible. I think I'll hand it back over to our moderator here, Maggie, and let's see if we can get to some questions.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve, for that. I'm going to tell you how to do the questions. We're going to take the questions through the chat function on this program. If you look to the black bar on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see a little box at the very bottom of that black bar. And if it doesn't say send to presenters, please use the arrow, drop it down, click on send to presenters, and we will then get your messages, your questions, and I'll read out the questions for Steve to answer. And Steve, we already have a question, so I'm going to read that to you. Kathy asks or says that Republicans in Congress are already saying that they're not going to contribute money to the Green Climate Fund to help the poor countries. And she's wondering if there's any role of the church in calling out our country's moral responsibility of contributing and thinking creatively of how we might do so if Congress refuses to allocate the Green Climate Fund. So any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for the question, Kathy. That's a really important question. It is not currently in the budget. It was proposed to be in the budget at $500 million, $500 million, by the president. It is not yet in the budget. We're not giving up on that. The church we currently have an action alert on let me give you another website. I'm sorry, I didn't think to type it up here. It's confrontglobalpoverty.org, confrontglobalpoverty.org. That's a website that's jointly maintained by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and Catholic Relief Services. And it's part of our Catholics Confront Global Poverty initiative, so confrontglobalpoverty.org. And you will find an action alert there that says to Congress, we need to fund the Green Climate Fund. We need to make this investment. One of the arguments I think that will work with both Democrats and Republicans is this is in our self-interest, that no matter how much we cut back on emissions, if developing countries take the same path of development that we took, that is heavily carbon intensive, we will not succeed in limiting carbon emissions globally, and we will suffer the ill effects of that. So it's in our self-interest. It's also in our security interest, because we know that climate change is causing conflict around the world. The Pentagon has actually identified climate change as one of the major drivers of conflict in the world. It's a threat multiplier, they call it. And so I think we can use those arguments effectively. And my own personal belief is that Congress will indeed fund the Green Climate Fund.
Well, the second question then, Steve, thank you very much for that one, is what is your assessment of the pledges from countries so far for Paris?
That so far the pledges have been good. They are perhaps not enough to keep us under the 2% Celsius goal. Many are working on the assumption what seems to be a scientific consensus that we've got to limit global temperature increases to 2% Celsius or less. And it doesn't look like the current things that are on the table in Paris will be enough to do that, but it will be a major step in that direction. COP21 is not the end of the road. It's the beginning of this phase of the road. It's the next step down the road. And so let's take what we can get at COP21. Let's get some leadership going. Let's get some commitments made, and then let's build on that. That's what we're going to need to do. This is not going to be a short-term issue.
Well, Mary Elizabeth asked, has there been any direct communication with the U.S. parishes to use Laudato Si in a concrete way?
There actually has. We have done both press releases as well as targeted emails to Catholic parishes around the country and to dioceses across the country, sharing resources on Laudato Si. Typically, when an encyclical letter like Laudato Si comes out, it takes some time for it to sort of penetrate down to the parish level. But actually, I've been very encouraged. Our staff has been kept very busy going here and there around the country to give talks on Laudato Si. A lot of dioceses are engaged. One of the things that it might be interesting for people to know is that we did a survey of how many bishops issued statements on Laudato Si, over 120 of them. It's only 180 bishops in the country, and we maybe didn't count them all. So that's an incredible response. And this will become embedded within regular curriculum in parishes and so forth. But we have adult study materials on our websites. We have simple activities that children and youth can get engaged in. And I think you're going to see more and more activity in parishes, particularly when they gear up their catechetical programs.
I agree with that. Now, Janet wants the website again to Todd Stern. I'm going to go back on your slides. You all should be able to see that in front of you. So now you will see in the middle of the screen there how to reach the website in order to be in touch directly to Todd Stern. And then I also put in your own comments there that the website that Steve mentioned earlier, someone had asked that question. I wrote it in your chat section. It's confrontglobalpoverty.org. So with that, then we have another question. Mm-hmm. Yolanda has said, how do we work with those who in our own churches and communities feel they don't have the time for all this environmental stuff? What can we tell them?
What we can tell them is that they can begin in their personal lives. Our consumption patterns, our ability to recycle, our ability to use less energy. One of the things my wife and I have done in Virginia, which you wouldn't, it's not always known as a bastion of forward-looking thought, but in Virginia we have Dominion Virginia Power has a program where we can buy renewable energy through our energy provider. So my wife and I do that. It costs a little bit more than just getting regular power, but at least we know we're contributing to wind farms and development of alternative and renewable energy sources. But everybody can contribute. We can, instead of using paper bags, we use reusable bags. When we go shopping, we can simplify our lives and shop with less. I think there's room for everybody on this, because unless we make lifestyle changes that reduce our patterns of consumption, it's going to be really hard for our nation to adopt the policies that will actually reduce carbon emissions. So I think there's room for everyone to do a little something.
Well, I think this is a question that also has to do with the bishops. It's asking about why are the bishops so slow in preaching these ideas from the pulpit, or organizing the creation care committees or creation care teams, which, by the way, plug for Catholic Climate Covenant. If you go on our website, you can sign up and you can get free resources on how to set up a creation care team. But why there seems to be, the bishops seem to be slow in really setting the example for their flocks. And would you like to comment on that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. For the Catholic Church of the United States, this has been lightning speed for us. To have 120 bishops speak out on an encyclical letter, and we've had special events. I know in Chicago, Archbishop Supich had a joint event with the EPA to announce the greening up of their buildings in Chicago. I know Archbishop Wensky did a special event down in Miami about sea level rise. I know In the Diocese of Richmond, Virginia, the local bishop Bishop DiLorenzo did an event with the military, actually, in the Hampton Roads area about how climate change is a threat multiplier, and also Norfolk is starting to have streets that are going underwater because of the rise in sea level. I know we've had events out in the heartland in Des Moines, Iowa. There was a wonderful event on our food supply and on wind power and climate change. So I'm seeing a lot of activity. Is it universal in every diocese right now? Perhaps not, but I think you're going to see more and more activity. Just up the road from here, Archbishop Laurie in Baltimore did a whole big thing at their seminary on climate change and sharing the teaching. I think there's a lot more going on than people would imagine, and it's not just a few bishops here or there. It's every area of the country and multiple bishops. I was just at the University of Dayton, where the local church there is very involved in climate change issues. So I don't quite agree with the premise of the question, and I think you're going to see more and more.
I don't know whether I have the numbers exactly right, but we were tracking that as well at the Catholic Climate Covenant, and all of this activity that happened right after and through the summer, right after the production of Laudato Si. We know that there were 5,500 stories that were picked up by media across the country on the bishops and on the church's stance. So it is not static right now. I know that we at Catholic Climate Covenant actually sent a mailing to almost every parish in the U.S. with homily helps and study guides to help people continue to talk about this message. So,
right, and I'm going to share a piece of advice that as a parent I always use. Catch them while they're doing good. With kids, you try to catch them while they're doing the right thing. Affirm your bishop, affirm your pastor, affirm your parish when they do take up Laudato Si, because they'll get a lot of pushback. And it's really good to build on the positive and show what indeed can be done. Sorry, we have other questions.
Yes, we have two other questions that are specific with the COP21. And one question is, what are the next steps after COP21? And the second question is also, is there a mechanism to hold the countries to their pledges? One of the criticisms of Kyoto was that the nations were able to walk away from their agreements without impact. And the challenge is, what is the oversight at the international level? Now, perhaps
those are two great questions. What appears to be on the table at COP21, and I have this on fairly good authority, is some transparency and accountability mechanisms. In other words, when nations make their commitments, then those will be public. And there will be a regular reporting system of how they're doing compared to what they pledged to do. And that will be a very public process. So there'll be sort of maybe a global shaming that might go on for those who aren't meeting their pledges. And there'll be affirmations for those that are. And I'm hoping we're going to see, rather than a race to the bottom, a race to the top, that nations are going to want to show leadership on this. And it'll be a mark of a positive mark for a nation to be able to show global leadership. Now, the other thing is, COP21 is not the end. It's going to be COP22, right? And these annual meetings will be really important times to check in on where we are and to get additional commitments made for the future, which are going to be critical if we're going to really make a dent in this problem.
So wonderful. Well, this one says, what are the resources for pastors to receive homily guides and study guides?
Well, that's the one that's right up on your screen right now. And in the main part of the screen where it says usccb.org/environment. If you go there, there are actually homily helps there. There are prayers, there are study resources, there are links to action alerts and so forth. And I know Catholic Climate Covenant has also produced some really good materials, and I'm sure those can be found on your website as well for helping pastors to. One thing that's really important in preaching about an issue like climate change is to help people to ask the right questions. Pastors are often nervous about preaching about something where there may not be unanimity, but if they have a style that shows their concern for the question, their concern for people, their concern for the planet, their concern for the poor, and then help people to ask the right questions. are you know, are we doing what we can to protect our children's future and our grandchildren's future, and leave people with those questions so that they go out of church wondering about it and trying to figure out, well, what ought I do, rather than just giving them answers and sort of beating them over the head with it. You get a much better response that way, in a homily that gets people asking the right questions.
Yeah, I think that is so true, Steve. Yolanda is asking questions similar to that, but she was specifically concerned about older priests who are reluctant to preach on climate change, particularly those who don't want to do or take on any more work. And of course, I know sometimes we do see that in our parishes, but do you have any comments about that particular question?
One of the things that I find most helpful with priests, I used to work in a parish for many years. And when priests had people coming up to them and saying things like, "Father, that was a good homily. I especially appreciated when you approached this issue, and I think I think we need to hear more about that." That really helps to strengthen a pastor to take on an issue. I don't think it's good to lecture at priests. They have a tough job. What we're finding is that priests don't want to do things that make them look like they're judging people. And so we need to, if you look at the homily helps that we provide very positive ways for people to raise these issues in non-threatening ways that get people really thinking about the issue. And I would just I would literally print out some of the material and just bring it into the priest and say, hey, you might want to consider using something like this. But be nice, because just like all of us, nobody likes to be told how to do their job, right? I know I don't like to be told how to do my job, and although I could do a much better job of it, how would you like to be in charge of justice and peace in the world in this day and age? But to make positive suggestions and to affirm them when they do take a step, I think is really important. In my experience, most priests want to do the right thing.
That's wonderful. Here's a happy note from a parish. Kathleen writes that at her parish on September 1st, the day of prayer for creation, we read the encyclical aloud in the chapel. It took 6 hours and people really appreciated it. Now that's
what a wonderful creative idea.
I know, Kathleen. Kathleen, tell us where you're from. Type that in, Kathleen, if you're still on here, and let us know where you're from, and we'll say, because that's a wonderful thing.
That's a terrific idea, and it's a beautiful and simple, and it is long, and it's long because he doesn't just stay on the surface of these issues. He goes deep into, that this climate crisis is really a human crisis, and that we have to heal something in the human spirit in order to really take it on. That was that whole thing about living life more simply and yet more fully. So good for you for doing that. And I know a lot of parishes have done some very creative things with Laudato Si. And as I said, I think you'll see more and more of that, because this encyclical is not going to have a short shelf life. I think it'll be much like Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum on the condition of workers that was issued in 1891, and we still talk about it today. We're still working on labor rights and human rights, and I think you're going to see Laudato Si on this integral ecology of protecting the poor, protecting all people, protecting the planet. That's going to be with us for a very long time.
So one last question, and then two announcements. I'm going to do the announcements first. The first is that Kathleen's parish is St. Dominic's in Northfield, Minnesota, with a great pastor, Father Denny Dempsey. She wanted to know that. And then also,
good for Minnesota.
Yeah, good for Minnesota. The other comment I would like to make is that there is a typo in the screen in the how you reach Todd Stern. It's pretty close to what's written. It's CatholicClimateCovenant.org/act/advocate. So I sent that to all of you in the chat box, so you hopefully have that. And this is the last question. We are scheduled to end right now, but Steve, this is a good question. Are you familiar with the Green Faith certification for houses of worship?
Actually, I've heard some things about that, and that's wonderful. I'm also familiar with the EPA having various certification programs also for greening up buildings and things. And Green Faith has been a great international partner in the work of because this is not just a Catholic issue, is it? It's a human issue. And so it cuts across religious lines, which what was really encouraging to me is that you had groups of Muslims and Buddhists and members of the Jewish community and other Christian denominations all echoing the themes of Laudato Si within their own tradition and so forth. This is a global issue that we all have to face together, all people of faith and of people with no faith at all. And so, yes, I think that and similar efforts are really welcome. And thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you. It's 3:46. We went over 1 minute. I hope that people don't mind too much. I want to thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in some of our upcoming webinars. So with that, I will thank you again and offer you a very good day. Thank you.